Could you both introduce yourself in long sentences so I can catch your audio real nice?
João, do you want to go first?
Sure, yeah. My name is João. We are the two co-chairs of a student organization called Solidarity. You can go ahead.
I'm Lisa. I'm also the co-chair of Solidarity.
I love Solidarity. Now, let me just boost your audio on my end real quick. It sounds a bit better now, I think. Okay. All right. Well, we talked a little while ago, didn't we?
We did, yeah.
It was a good time. Though so much has happened since then, you're going to have to that was like a solid month and a half ago, I think. How'd the election go on over there? I'm sure being university students, you've had pitched arguments with plenty of people over the time.
It did not go well.
Florida especially, it's here, like, basically every single one of our elections went badly.
Oh shit, that's right. You guys are in Florida. Oh god. You're not in Frostwell's district, are you, by chance?
No.
No.
I'm sorry.
That's all right. Although I don't know if you remember, but I did say that I was from Brazil, and I'm very happy to say that Lula did win in Brazil. So I'm very happy about that.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, it was just the other day, I think, that a Brazilian court struck down some of the challenges that were made to Lula's win, and even ordered the Bolsonaro legal team to pay damages for acting in bad faith, which is fantastic, and I don't think it's something that the United States has, or at least does, very much.
No, I will say the Brazilian court system is very, very weird, and I would say that as an anarchist, that they do overstep their powers, like a lot. But their Brazilian government is so much different than the United States, but very similar in a lot of different ways. And so, in a lot of ways, it's better, and in a lot of ways, it's worse.
Gotcha. You're coming across really faded. It's kind of difficult to understand what you're saying. Do you have Oh, you're using a headset mic. I see. Wait, give me a sentence.
Hello?
Okay, here's what you're going to do. Flick your microphone on the headset, would you? I thought so. Your computer's picking up the wrong mic. It's using your laptop default mic.
All right, sounds good. I'm just gonna mute myself and figure this out.
I believe in you. It's the gear wheel down in the bottom left. You can see voice and video input, a couple of options there. You'll find the right one. I believe in you. Okay. Yeah, what's the I guess what's the what's the discourse like right now at uni, you know? I feel like everything got so much worse right after I graduated that, discourse calmed down a little bit. I mean, what have you been up to the past month?
I feel like it depends on the university talking about. I mean, for us, I think that this goes for every single one, though. Like, it was voting, just people constantly, going on the place, like the congregation space. Yeah. And just, harassing people to, vote or, sign off on bills. It's the same thing every year. In terms of, I don't know, politics or discourse at the uni, I'm not sure. It's been pretty quiet, which is funny because that's very rare.
Yeah, I guess I can't really imagine. The university that I went to was in a pretty unabashedly progressive area. I don't know how much discourse there is. Considering how far left-leaning the Gen Z voters were, I imagine that pretty much every university is going to be, at the very least, split 50-50, if not, openly progressive in their tendencies.
I will say, I forgot to mention this. Before, I mentioned to you that we were going to do a debate, and we did it, and did really well. So I just wanted to let you know that
I'm
we
happy
did
to
do
hear
that,
that.
and it was really cool. Yeah.
What was the topic on again?
I think it was okay. So Joel, correct me if I'm wrong. One of them was abortion. The other one was Supreme Court judges, and I can't remember the other one. But it was 3 topics.
Yeah, so it was on abortion. It was about Supreme Court justices, and it was like gun control. However, the questions were like mostly centered around like school stuff. Which, by the way, does my mic sound any better at all?
Yes, it does. You sound much less wispy.
All right, sounds good. So yeah, we had this debate with the conservatives, and next semester we're looking to do the same thing and doing like more things like that, where we just kind of like get a sort of like discourse more involved. Because what Lisa I think was trying to say about like it being quiet was that at least in our school, it's not the school is not itself very political. Most people aren't really super involved politically, and the voting rate, for example, is like very low, and the engagement for like political like groups is also very very small, and so it's very difficult. It's difficult to win anything here anyway. So
Difficult to win anything because the broader voter base is skewed so far right.
exactly, yeah.
And
Yeah,
also, like, it's a bunch of other things. It's very complicated for our specific region of Florida too, because it's all the weird things. It's bad. Yeah.
well, all the more Floridian things.
Exactly, yeah. However,
Shout
we are
out.
here not necessarily just to talk about electoralism, but we're here to talk about two things. One being local organizing as socialists, as leftists, as anarchists, and specifically not electoral organizing. And the second thing would be like a broad problem of misogyny on the left, and what we would kind of say is like general constructive criticism, not at all anything like vindictive or anything, like, but constructive criticism about misogyny and stuff, about like just the left in general, but also your community and stuff.
Yeah, well, absolutely. Hit me up. Yeah, I've got till the end of the hour. I admit that my brain's been a bit fried lately, partly on account of being 30% turkey after Thanksgiving, um, and also on account of the tumultuous political climate. Um, but no, please, whatever you'd like to talk about.
I wanted to bring up local organizing, I wanted to ask you a couple questions about if you've, ever organized in your area. Like, I was gonna ask if you had any experiences with that. You know, what's your resume?
For organizing, not so much. I've done canvassing a couple of times, but they weren't for political organizing efforts. They were for like specific NGO efforts, which pans out a bit different. I know enough about it on account of me working with the Progressive Victory 2022 people, who of course know quite a lot about it, and I've done work to facilitate some of their interests on stream. But in terms of direct stuff, I much prefer to leave it to professionals.
Fair
Yeah,
enough. Yeah.
I like a operative word, professionals, but yeah.
Relative professionals.
Yeah, so then the next question would be sort of something like, do you think that underground local organizing is something that you think is important, especially like from the left?
Well, yeah, it's critical. You got to do it. We filled out thousands of volunteer slots through PV22 this year. We're going to do a lot more in Georgia as well. So I'm in that respect, I'm definitely enacting my interests. But no, it's the failure of the left to do stuff like this for the longest time that's made it really, really, really difficult to compete with some conservative organizing.
I will say, like, absolutely. Although I'm not really involved with a lot of electoral organizing, I have seen that like engagement like outside of like internet spaces is like extremely extremely difficult. Um, I've seen a lot of like in those experiences at least like a lot of just like events but then like a really small turnout because like people are mostly online just like kind of supporting from afar, which is like kind of frustrating because it's like conservatives are out there, they're so angry and they're just like in a way that's how they get things done is just by like making kind of a ruckus, and it's hard to kind of get that kind of energy um outside. So yeah.
Although certainly we know some left wing, very very like prolific left wing organizers who have made like a big ruckus. So
Yeah, well, I mean, the issue is that a huge portion of the conservative voter base are boomers, who will always show up to vote, and people who believe in and have faith in like older modes of communication and organizing. Younger people do everything online, which is fine, except that it's actually impossible to get anything out of somebody purely through the online engagement. People just consume so much content so flippantly online that you hear, in between the thousands and thousands of terrible bits of news or bits of media or clips or highlights or TikTok videos, you get like, oh, here, got to get out and vote. It doesn't work for a lot of people. It doesn't stick in their head. It doesn't feel important. You got to show up at their door and, I don't know, splash water on them. It's the best you can do.
Yeah, especially because like when you tell people like, okay, well things are kind of getting worse, guys. Like this is kind of serious. We gotta do stuff. It seems like there's like two reactions, and the first one is, oh my god, I am gonna do something, which is great, and then there's the other, which is kind of like the doomer reaction, which is just like, oh, yeah, you're right, everything is worse. Oh my god, I don't know what to do.
Yeah, well, we also tend to default to that a little bit more as well. An awareness of how bad things have gotten also tends to work against us because people feel burnt out if they get overly invested or overly emotional or passionate. Um, in a lot of ways, unfortunately, the most effective political advocate is largely unaware, is kind of stupid and ignorant, and just like dumbly goes along with a couple of basic signals they're given from their preferred political group and defends them if furiously but ignorantly. That's probably like the most effective political agent, which that's kind of an indictment of our democratic system, but it's also the truth.
True.
absolutely,
Yeah.
do you want to ask the next question?
Wait, which where?
I
Sorry.
will say that that question is a little bit. I'm just going to say, like, what do you think are sort of the issues that you think people face when it comes to like underground organizing that like kind of get in the way of actual action in the left?
What do you mean by underground organizing?
Oh, I said on the ground,
Oh,
on the
okay,
ground.
that makes a
I'm
lot more sense.
sorry.
Underground organize. Well, gee, I don't know the rats, the crocodiles in the sewer. Um, on the ground organizing. Well, the difficulty is just that you have to go out and do it. All these hippin' and happening kids these days, they've got ADHD. They play their video phone games. Um, you have to go out there and physically do work. A lot of this is facilitated by the social networks that people don't really have anymore. It used to be the case that if you were like a left-leaning kind of political agent, you would have friends at local clubs or bars who just had natural connections to the kinds of groups who would do that sort of political organizing. But nowadays, because you can do everything online, the friends that you have, even if you're left leaning, it doesn't necessarily mean you have any real connection to like local political operations. And it's easier than ever to feel like you're actually doing something when you're just spending time online, not actually doing anything. So it's just you got to lure people out of their shells a bit, and organizing can be fun work if you're willing to do it too.
I would agree with that. And actually, I will say that like that absolutely there's this thing where people are not connected to these networks of people who are doing these things. But the one thing that I would say is that those networks absolutely exist, and you can get to meet them. And kind of the reason why we're here as well is to encourage your audience to do that. And I'm not like we're not encouraging anything like super revolutionary other than just like start feeding the homeless people of your community. You know what I mean? Pick a day each week and a couple of your friends, and those friends can be liberals, and those friends can get together and start doing this. And what you'll find is that people will naturally kind of like gravitate to you, and you will naturally discover those kinds of networks. um Lisa, do you want to say anything?
I was gonna say shout out because we're also doing that. We're taking donations, so if you're in the South Florida area, please hit us up at sol.fau on Instagram. We are taking anything because we actually are giving like food and hygienic products and clothes like every
Yeah,
Wednesday, I think, from now on.
Saturday. Yeah, so the main thing is just that like it's in the left, I think a lot of people like think that they can end their political like what they're doing politically on the things that they believe rather than the things that they're currently doing. And it's one advice that I give to people that are asking, specifically my online friends who live far away, it's like, what exactly do you do in order to get involved? And the thing that I say is just find out who your like local Funa Bombs chapter is and just start showing up and start helping out. And those people are probably doing other things too. And those people are going to ask you to come along. And that's how you get your friends to come along too, you know?
Yeah, it's important to wait. What? Why? All right, just 1 second.
Do we have chat for ourselves? I don't have a chat open right now, but it would be funny if
Sorry,
chat was listening to this.
3D coordinates on one of my fat cats was requested. Just making sure that he's chilling. Anyway, yeah, no, it's forming those natural bonds is important. I think it's also important to, you know, to be at least a little bit more cynical here, to not get overly wrapped up in like the image of being the kind of person who does that work, and then allow that to keep you from being more ambitious. So like the feeding the homeless thing, for example, great thing to do. Long term, it solves nothing, of course, because if anything, the city gets dependent on these systems of sort of charitable subsidization. It's a good thing to do. Ideally, you take that, you get people involved, and then you leverage it as a way of trying to capture some kind of institutional power. You know,
But that's exactly what we're saying.
it
You know what I
is,
mean? It's like
and I'm saying it's critical to keep that going. A lot of people get caught up in step one, you know, especially if they make it a kind of like an identifier thing, right? Like you know what I'm talking about, the kind of person who gets they think of themselves as a good person, and in so doing they become kind of complacent in the ways in which they engage with these systems because they're already doing something, so they feel like it's no longer something they have to give much thought to. It's not like a critical issue here. I know some people who have fallen into that hole.
No, absolutely. The thing is that like I would say don't get involved in like in organizations that are doing that kind of charitable work. But that's their end goal. Like the goal of this organization is just to do this charitable work. And also, I feel like we shouldn't think of it as charity. I much prefer like the like mutual aid, which is the people of a particular community helping out other people of that community. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah, no, entirely. It's really just about using whatever step you're on to build to the next one. Unfortunately, the dynamics of this are always going to work differently for us than for conservative groups, because conservative groups don't really have that like grassroots on the ground organizing level. It's all top down. You know, you have billionaires who put money towards political action committees, and they use those monies to that money to fund a bunch of different projects, and those projects will hire people to achieve some kind of goal. Um, Unfortunately, it's actually quite good on their end. You know, like having a bunch of money is actually very useful. But there have been times where legitimate grassroots organizing has been far more effective at enacting social change. So it's good to use that when you can.
Do you want to move to the next topic?
Well, no, I wanted to ask
Yeah.
on issues about like you know what I mean, or maybe to just talk about a little more about the issues. Did you want to talk about that?
Oh no, I mean I briefly mentioned them earlier. I think we mentioned before, like, you know, various Florida things make it very difficult to like, you know, work politically. It's a hellscape here. It's horrible. Some of the things, like off the top of my head, it's not walkable here. I have to drive everywhere. I am very poor. Gas is like not $4, but like $3.36.
I will say
it is.
we're complaining about something that like it costs $7 or something.
That's true.
But it's very expensive and we've got to drive everywhere.
Yeah, it's horrible. And I briefly mentioned the fact that like a lot of people don't really get involved outside to, you know, like either protest or to get involved with, you know, like electoralism especially, but like in terms of like protests and things, like you only see like a hiccup of some action and then just nothing for months and months and months on end. Yeah, and because you don't have many people at these things, at least regularly, you know, there's a lot of violence towards alt-right people, or no, not towards alt-right people, but like from alt-right people and like cops. It's kind of weird. It's kind of scary. Not very fun. Um, yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, a lot of this, I think, this has been kind of like an optical issue for the left for decades. Like you see this Antifa black bloc stuff as well, which I think has been misused in a lot of ways. There aren't enough leftists to enact change for most of the social issues we have a strong opinion on. You know, leftists are relatively uncommon, especially once you leave university, which is, of course, where they are most highly concentrated. It's really about getting liberals, wine moms, you know, dads who would rather be grilling, that kind of thing. You know, the more you can capture people's interests broadly, the more effectively you can enact social change. You know, politicians really don't care about pissing off college students because college students are always pissed off. They do care about pissing off like suburban voters, you know, people in their 50s and 60s. Um, and I think, you know, in large part, effectiveness to this end and avoiding violence from the alt-right and from cops is about attempting to build to lay stepping stones to radical goals with the cloak of like liberal or moderate politics, you know? Like in theory, everyone can get behind feeding the homeless. You know, in theory, of course. Jesus Christ did this, you know, whatever. Um, but there are groups who do this in a fashion which looks quite radical, and there are groups which do not. And knowing which group to be in any given environment or situation is really, really, really helpful at either winning or losing the support of the people around you. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. I do think that there's a although I agree with you that it's very useful to have a cloak of liberalism. I think that there are two problems with wearing the cloak of liberalism over radical politics, which is that one, like your politics starts to change to become a little more liberal with like the sort of adherence to practicality. And then the second thing is that I think that the point of like creating like on the ground leftist organizing that's bottom up and democratic and stuff, and that does things that directly help out the community, and that also gets together and that participates in in protests and political action, that goes door to door on campuses, that goes door to door and like tries to help people who are being evicted, that kind of thing, gets you to be like visible. You know what I mean? I think it's good when when a very like self-declared radical organization is visible and people like them because of the stuff that they're doing, which directly benefits them.
Of course, if they can get people to like them. Um, and that's always like the critical distinction, right? There's a reason why, especially back in the 1980s, you would have like radical, like leather, like mohawk wearing tattoo gay bar type guys, and these people would be public and visible and socially organized in urban environments, in New York City, in San Francisco, not in like the suburbs outside of, you know, the suburbs outside of Miami. The area you're in really determines how effectively you're going to win folks over, not just people outside the group, but getting people into the group as well. That's not always the right move to sort of tamper down the aesthetics or the optics of a group. Oftentimes, it can be very good to be radically organized. The Black Panther Party, for example, didn't hide their revolutionary ambitions at all, and they were very socially effective in a lot of ways. Until, of course, you know, their leaders got co-opted and killed, and they all fell apart. But you know, it's the such is the fate of the revolutionary. Of course, of note, they also did their organizing in cities that had large black populations that would be sympathetic to their aims, not in like areas where they would have just been seen as a bunch of like militant N-words and shot from like the windows of white suburban dads, you know?
I don't disagree at all. It's I think that the United States has a very difficult history when it comes to leftist organizing. For that, I would like say that there are other countries where that kind of leftist organizing has worked. In Brazil, there's the landless workers movement, which is specifically like a rural movement. But I think that's the job of on the ground activists in their own specific communities to figure out solutions for.
Yeah. It's just something I think people should be aware of, you know? The ability to play off the expectations and interests of a more moderate population is literally like the key to victory for any leftist group. If you look at countries where leftists have been more successful, like Bolivia, for example, right? Evo Morales, the socialists there, or the social democrats, you know, the socialists there have done an excellent job unifying more radical class politics with a broader message of reconciliation, equality, and like justice for the poor and for the indigenous. Which over here in America would be more radical, but over in Bolivia, it's to a lot of people, it's more, I don't know, universally appealing, I guess. It's not as divisive, at least in some groups. And in that respect, they've been good in kind of unifying that. It's tough. I mean, it's America's such a big place. We're such a huge country. You two live in Florida. I mean, Christ, I live on the opposite side of the country. I'm in Seattle. What I can get away with and what the two of you can get away with in terms of like if we were to do door-to-door organizing, how we would act or dress or what terms we would use, radically different, you know? Um, I swear, half the houses in the city, you could probably go up and use terms like proletariat, and people would be like, "Oh yeah, okay, yeah." But I imagine where the two of you live, you know, you would have to, Jesus, I don't know. Can you make your faces whiter? Well, I don't actually know which city you two are in. I just know that Florida's got some pretty wild voting records for the past few elections, and it's gotten a lot worse in the past decade.
It's funky. This town that we're living in. I'll just say that much. It's
Yeah.
very funky.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then like I would say like speaking on like issues on the ground activism, I feel like we should probably move on to the next thing. But the last thing that I wanted to say is that we're just urging like your your audience. Like if you are a person who lives in any kind of community, there are things that you can do that are really easy that are going to help people out, and that you can meet other organizers, if there are other activists and other organizers, other leftists that already exist in your community. And because or at least I did, I don't think you were there, Lisa, right? For the when the Florida Board of Medicine decided to take away protections for trans people.
Yeah, that was cool.
Very dope. But us and a bunch of our friends and a bunch of these people that we met through like this kind of like organizing, we were there, and we were protesting, and we like kind of went in and we gave our voices and we voted on their election. Not that it really helped, but it was those people who were politically active, those people who were like constantly doing things to help people out, that were there and that were trying to fight it in the little ways that they could, and then they also probably voted and when the election came around. And one thing from that day that was that the group of leftists that were there, the group of anarchists, like were outside and protesting, and because there weren't enough of them, and not because there aren't anarchists here, because we know that like we could have easily doubled that number if people just showed up. Like the cops outnumbered them and arrested 3 of them. So for like on BS grounds, like just trespassing.
Yeah, well, obviously numbers are always going to help in that respect. It's way easier for cops to deal with a smaller group. And it also, having a large group out there goes a long way towards giving the impression of public unpopularity for the bill, which is obviously, very important for us. Um, it probably wouldn't have changed the actual ruling, in the long run, but it definitely sort of lays the groundwork for any future action against it. People can remember it as, oh, remember that bill that passed, or that decision that was reached when everyone was outside screaming at them and throwing rocks at the building. Yeah, I remember that. It must have been pretty unpopular. Stuff like that shapes the narrative in the long term.
I was gonna say, adding on to what Joao said, they got charged for trespassing specifically on a like sidewalk, They were walking. They were just standing there. It was
They
a
were
time.
walking to their cars to leave.
Oh, there you go. Yeah.
Well, they can charge you with whatever they want, of course. A lot of it, I mean, a lot of it will get overturned the moment you show up in court, too. It's literally just a way of terrifying young people, and getting them to skedaddle immediately.
No, yeah, because I think that that's what happened there. But so going on from like sort of like on the ground organizing, we've had issues with people that have tried to join our group or have been participated in our group. And if you want to, Lisa, if you want to take it.
I'm sorry. Can you say that again?
We have dealt with some people who like show some bad sort of characteristics. Go ahead.
Oh, yeah. I mean, the group that we have at school, Solidarity, it's not so many, like, we don't have so many men anymore because, either A, tankies, like, weirdly enough, or it's just like misogynists, namely misogynists who just like come to these meetings or come to meetings like at our universities, like leftist meetings just to like bag women, which is dope. Great support, like horrible stuff. And so we've seen that with a lot of like left leaning spaces where you see a lot of men typically get really passionate about leftist topics like BLM, all of these different things. I can't really name anything off the top of my head because whatever. But when it comes to like misogyny or sex work or any of like the difficult topics, quote unquote, when it comes to feminism, nothing, absolutely nothing, silent. And yeah, it's really sad because you by doing that, these spaces, the numbers dwindle. There isn't that many people who can participate and like really help the community out, and it's on the basis of like treating others with respect, which is what this movement is about, at least at the base level.
No, yeah, unfortunately, like, for a lot of guys, their politics and political engagement will be determined almost entirely by their attitude towards women. It's pretty weird. I think there's a joke in Disco Elysium where if your character goes down the fascist route, your internal dialogue starts talking about how at the root of this is like a weird feeling about women. At the root of it all, it's just about women. And I think it does kind of get down to that. I mean, like the biggest entry point for basically every element of far right organization these days is guys feel weird about women. The incel thing, well, that one's easy. The Gamergate thing, which was like the turning point for a ton of internet discourse, was fully about like these sluts are stealing away, these SJW women with blue hair are stealing away our video games. Um, a ton of the current like trans politics like craze is kind of predicated on the idea of femininity crippling the Western male and therefore destroying society, like leading to civilizational collapse. It comes back to like women and femininity over and over and over again. And I think that with that, like if that's not really dealt with, a lot of other sort of superseding political positions are going to be kind of shallow or not really well thought out, especially when it comes to like leftism, because you can't go that far without addressing some of those beliefs, which is which seems to be kind of impossible for some people, unfortunately. I don't really know what's to be done about that. It seems like, if anything, it's getting worse. There was a 14-point difference between men and women, if I remember correctly. It could have been 12, when it came to voting D versus R in the most recent election. Like, fully, like women being like 20% more progressive on average than guys, which is such a huge shift, given the fact that men and women equally populate all, like, parts of the country, more or less. Yeah, mm, yeah, I don't know. It's pretty gay, I think. That's my official sort of diagnosis. It's pretty gay.
Yeah. Like on the basis of progressivism, it's it's weird that misogyny is one of those things that people still can't really get like a full picture on, or at least some sort of a better understanding of, because I've met people who have, you know, are extremely willing to talk about politics, or extremely willing to talk about or at least do things and like participate, but kind of lose that like passion when it comes to, you know, like any kind of feminist topic. I specifically remember a call where we were discussing the Roe v. Wade overturn, and there was a couple of people in chat, and they were talking about how like it was terrible, how the politics were, or how, you know, it just didn't make sense. And so someone says, okay, so what are we going to do now about this? Like what, like how are we going to, you know, protest, or at least try to you know, so show any kind of community support? And they left the call. So
Not
yeah.
after like, by the way, after like spending like 30 minutes arguing about like something else that the two of them were just passionate about. It's just these two dudes who essentially hijacked the conversation in order to talk about something else. And I feel like that's kind of like a big thing. There was these dudes who would show up like to meetings, and that's just to like talk over people, like talk a lot, interrupt people, and then like hit on girls as soon as it was out, and then those people never actually like either contributed like materially to the group, or you know, attended anything, ever showed up to any protests, never really like canvassed or did anything, you know.
Yeah.
And a lot of those
It's a good
people ended up
strat.
getting kicked out, you know, due to their behavior outside of, you know. And I don't want to talk about those.
Well, there are going to be guys who literally just see it as a social space that's going to have a lot of women. Any kind of left political organizing space is going to be, it's going to have more chicks than like a lot of other places. Um, I mean, I don't know how much of it is these guys are misled and how much of it is these guys are being fully exploitative, but um, yeah, I guess it's always something that's had to be dealt with. I mean, a lot of it is probably like an intuition thing, right? Fascist politics are very intuition based. Obviously, if you think about this shit too hard, none of it makes sense. Um, so they kind of rely on fear, disgust primarily, but like for a lot of straight guys, you know, and this is a broad thing, you know, no, regardless of your gender, sex, sexuality. But I think especially a lot of straight guys have very like intuition based responses to women. They don't have to think about it as much. Straight women have to think about men because men represent the threat of sexual violence far more than the reverse it does. So there's always like a broader consideration or like a limiter there, you know. Women who pay no attention whatsoever to what men do around them are usually victimized pretty quickly in life. So that there's kind of like a, I don't know, like an evolutionary tendency towards at least some kind of reflection there, but not so much for guys. So a lot of them, I think, just kind of like stumble their way into whatever positions around women feel the most right. And obviously, a lot of them are really, really dumb. And it leads to them being, at the very least, terrible allies. So, yeah.
I think that like part of it is sort of like these people actually taking advantage of this like a group of people who they like that they can sort of date, you know, generally attractive young people who are who are socialists. But at the same time, I think it's also some people feel like they're immune to like either misogyny, racism, you know, homophobia or whatever. Sort of like an "I have a black friend" type of attitude towards the left.
Yeah, and it's easier to take this stuff less seriously when you feel like you're not personally threatened as well, of course. Um, which, you know, hey, depending on the way things go in this country, we'll see how many people end up getting sort of directly implicated in the rising threat level that we're seeing. Um, Probably won't ever get to the point where your average college white guy is going to feel like he has to personally join the cause and fight for the revolution, or else. But you know, the more serious this stuff gets, I mean, I guess we'll see where people fall.
And I will also point out this like one thing that that Lisa and I have talked about, that like kind of happens, and you generally look on Twitter, which is like things like white woman jokes. which actually just turn out to just be like sexist or jokes about women. And one thing that we started talking about is how like sometimes and like specifically in the left as well, we also make homophobic jokes like in the guise of anti-bottom jokes, right? And then we talked about it, and we were basically came to the agreement that it's just like, oh, it's just femininity. You know what I mean? People just kind of hate femininity, and of course, there's toxic femininity in the same way that there's toxic masculinity. But I think that sometimes, in certain sides of the left, we kind of have a blind spot in dealing with that.
Yeah. I mean, I certainly can't deny that I do that shit all the time. I try to balance it out by making plenty of jokes at the expense of guys and more masculine people as well. But no, there are fairly well ingrained tendencies, and it is true that 99% of jokes that people make about bottoms are basically just like wife guy making wife jokes 50 years ago, you know? Like it's the same thing. It's just like cool and subversive now because it's top bottom rather than husband wife, which I mean the underlying logic remains exactly the same, which maybe that stuff gets softened a little bit because the power dynamic between tops and bottoms isn't like a social thing the same way that the power dynamic between men and women in the 1950s was, you know, it's there's not as much like weight to that, but it does speak to the same tendencies as at the very least. That like silencer, I guess, or like putting a pillow over it, like putting white woman instead of woman for the jokes, you know? Very much the case there as well. Like it's a way of sort of dampening the perceived weight or like social harm. Because, making jokes about women, oh well, sure, that's, sexist. But white women, well, white women are the people who call the cops when they see a black guy in the park. So they're actually they're like an okay target. And then you go on to make jokes exclusively about them being a woman and not them being a white woman. Like the things you're saying could apply like very broadly. Yeah, it's definitely a thing.
By the way, while y'all were talking about bottoms and how that's also another part of the jokes, I was looking at chat and yeah, it's there.
Oh, for sure. Though keep in mind, a lot of the people in my chat, being themselves bottoms, are engaging in a bit of light self-deprecation. Um, though yes, that is certainly the case. Um, it is a lot more difficult to tell. If there's any like good ending here, I think it's like a kind of like total saturation of these jokes. The same way that you'll see like there are some progressive spaces where things will blur to the point where it's like, are you making a sexist joke, a misandrist joke, a transphobic joke, or are you ironically referencing the bigotry in all three in order to make something legitimately funny that isn't prejudiced at all? If you're in a progressive enough space, I think the answer is that it doesn't matter as much, which is the good ending, right? Because the good ending is one in which we have like a general faith in everyone else's politics. So we don't need to worry that something that is funny but could be dicey. We don't need to worry like, oh, is this potentially bad or harmful? We're not there yet, broadly, of course. Though some spaces are definitely further along than others.
And speaking of that, do you want to move on to the next thing? Sorry, I didn't know if you wanted to speak.
I was just gonna say yeah, like completely true. Yeah.
Well, that's why it's something conservatives tend not to understand. But they think that being on the left is, being snowflakey or being overly sensitive. Don't get me wrong, very much the case in plenty of places. But there are spaces on the left where there's almost like you almost achieve like the dream that I would have had as a 13-year-old white boy of like an almost like, I don't want to say like a post problematic social space because that's not really a thing, but an environment where you can think, okay, I know everyone here is cool, so I can like tell all these funny jokes that might be interpreted more poorly in a different environment. You see this selectively all the time. Trans stand up comics will make tons of trans jokes. Jewish stand up comics will make tons of Jewish jokes. The Boondocks are full of anti black jokes made by left leaning black, creators. So I think everyone kind of wants to end up there to an extent where we can be self deprecating and be more flippant. It's just a matter of to what extent are we facilitating really bad social politics, which is, of course, unfortunately, a lot of what happens with some people who watch the Boondocks come away from that thinking like, oh, haha, funny black people, or we see with Dave Chappelle, or like those Chris Rock bits that he discontinued. or it's possible for it to just end up not, you know, like it ends up leaving the target audience.
Yeah. I will say I also kind of engage with or engage in like, you know, ironic misogyny because I think it's funny as me being one of the loudest feminists like in our friend group, me being like, "Oh yeah, but no, I'm a stupid woman, right?" and like making fun of my friends for, you know, trying to just be normal, you know? It's funny. I just it does also you know, matter from who that comes from, you know? Um I remember watching someone doing a interview on, I forget who it is exactly, but it's one of those, you know, completely ironic people who just never stop trolling. Just the entire, that's their whole bit is that they never give up the bit, and I think that that's a part of, you know, um, this kind of dynamic is that you do have to give up the bit once in a while because if you don't, then it is just being bigoted. That is just the joke. Is that you believe in this bigotry, and the people that are laughing believe in this bigotry. So you do have to like at least set some kind of common ground to show that. To show that actually no, I think those guys are weird. I'm making fun of how weird and absurd it is because I don't really believe in this stuff.
At the end of the day, this is stuff that it can only really be remediated in like a friend group or in a very strictly controlled social space. Even I push the limits with my live stream, you know? Like I feel like my humor is interpreted in its appropriate context when I make jokes that are like ironically misogynistic, because a lot of ironic misogynistic jokes, for example, can be self-deprecating when done by a guy. Like for instance, if you've messed up in some way or made a mistake or are in error, and then you reflexively blame a woman, in a progressive space, the interpretation can be the joke is he's a guy and he can't handle that he was in the wrong. So he makes a joke about, you know, like about something that a woman's done. Um, like as just a very basic example, you know. Um, but again, like that stuff can be misinterpreted so easily. I think you need to have crackdowns on that as well. Like there, if you see people going overboard or like maybe missing the intended point of the joke, you can try to like hammer it in. I had that problem with the triple parentheses because like Nazis will, when they want to indicate something as Jewish control, they'll put it in triple parentheses called echoes. Um, and the funny thing for me is that like neo-Nazis they're retards. They're very stupid. So everything they don't understand is Jewish controlled. Everything. They stub their toe on a curbside, and that curbside has the echoes around it. You know, they're totally undiscerning. Everything is Jewish to them. Um, so people in my chat I would say like, you know, oh yeah, sorry, stream is late. You know, I got held up. There was this one guy in traffic cut me off, and then they put that in the echoes, like the one guy in traffic. You know, like well, he's part of it too. You know, and I mean, I do find this very funny. You know, because the joke is at the expense of the Nazis who use this, you know, so like broadly. Um, but then eventually it got diluted to the point where people just started putting the triple brackets around everything, where it was no longer they were making fun of the Nazis. They were now just doing the thing the Nazis did. There was no longer any material distinction between the bit and the reality. And at that point, we just banned people who did it, as the people in chat are about to find out if they keep it up.
I'm seeing that right now,
Yeah,
which
if
is
they're
really really
as they
funny.
will be reminded shortly, unless they cut that shit out. Um,
As part of the research, which by the way I find it hilarious that research for this video just counted as like just watching a bunch of your videos. I saw one where you were just like reacting to pictures of like screenshots of people from your chat, like making sexist jokes and them just being not funny. And it's just like I think that's kind of that's like oh that's the problem. It's just that they're just not good jokes.
Yeah, no, really. Yeah, because that's one of the big determining factors right there. If a joke is funny, you can shame me for this, fine. A lot of people do. If a joke is funny, I can accept it being a bit problematic. You know, humor is one of the few things that we have, okay? Everything's falling apart. Like, you know, we have some humor. If it's a bit problematic, maybe a bit actually sexist or whatever, like, okay, fine. But if the joke isn't funny, but there's still some like racism or sexism or whatever, that means then the point wasn't, okay, I'm going to be a bit problematic, but the joke's going to be a banger. That wasn't for the humor. It couldn't have been for the humor because it's not funny. It must have been for the bigotry. And that's what you see in all these far-right groups. You go to Stormfront, and it'll be all these people telling black jokes. And are these jokes funny? No. They're just racist. They're deeply unfunny. I don't think they're laughing at it either. They're using the humor as a delivery mechanism for the racism, you know? So if a joke is funny, I can at least believe that a sacrifice was being made for a greater purpose, making people laugh. But if there's no humor, then it's like, okay, you're just using this as an excuse. You know what I mean?
That's horrible, but that's also really funny.
It's a metric that, no, legitimately, you'll find it. You listen, go online and you'll find, you know, the left and the right. Tally up how many sexist jokes you can find. You'll find some on both sides, far more on the right, but still. The ones on the left, you're going to see much more precision with the comedy. The ones on the right, they just like the sexism. The humor is incidental, you know?
It might also have to do with the amount of effort that's being put into, the comedy, because it's like, if the joke is just, oh, I hate XYZ minority, then it's like, okay, funny, we've heard that one before. I mean, you have to be a little bit more creative, but maybe like, the point that you're making is that like on the left, it's a little bit more complicated because people actually do put that effort to still, quote unquote, make that sacrifice. I
Well,
don't.
I think we have an intuitive understanding of this as well, right? Because if you can imagine like a black guy in a mixed social setting, right? I think that most of them, at least in the conversations I've had broadly, would understand the difference between like a white uncle in his 50s making some joke like, well, what's the difference between a black guy and a pizza? A pizza can feed a family of 4. Like, I think you can, some like canned bullshit like that. I think you can immediately write that guy off as like fucking racist ass boomer piece of shit, whatever. You know, like it's easy to make that write off, you know? But like if you can imagine like something more well delivered or more well thought out, like something, I don't know, like a fucking Boondocks joke or something. I'm trying to think, can I think of like a white comic who's made a good black joke? I think fuck. I don't have a good memory for this.
My metric is that if you can imagine your dad saying it, then it's probably not very good.
No, yeah, well, because a lot of the dad jokes, right? They're like overdone and unfunny. Not my dad. My dad's great. Um, but yeah, anyway, just broad metric. It's like, well, why was the joke being made? You know, was it being made to make people laugh or to sort of test the waters on the limits of acceptable bigotry? You know, and I think that's what has to be worked out. You can see this too in the Discord channels as well. There are some people. It's like, okay, wow, thanks for the sexist joke. You made 50 in the past hour. You know, like what are you getting from it at this point? Like, you must just like being sexist, and then you can call them on that. But I'm just rambling at this point.
That's fair. Oh, by the way, how much time do you have left?
Oh, I can go a few over the hour, but past that, sorry, time just flies talking to the both of you. We're having so much fun.
Yeah, thank you.
Wow, thank you.
Because I was gonna say, like, we should probably, because specifically the reason why we like, or Lisa messaged you specifically was because of like some stuff specifically from your community, or that you said that we just wanted to talk about. Lisa, do you want to take that?
Yeah, kill me.
Yes. Hello. Oh, I'm sorry. Were you gonna say something?
No, I was saying, yeah, kill me.
I'm trying not to because I do support your stuff. I really do. So I've had this conversation with a couple of my friends, like surrounding this topic because I also, I say like, hey, guys, let's not be misogynistic sometimes. I think that's a fair thing to say. One of your streams, I kind of noticed a pattern with, I think it was a debate, yeah, where like I see this thing happen, and it's sexism kind of being weaponized it as like relatability towards towards Nazis or towards people who typically disagree with you. And I mentioned this to someone, and they said, well, I mean, it's for relatability. It's so you can at least have that conversation with them. And I wanted to hear like what you have to say about that, because one of the debates I'm talking about was a fairly recent one. I forget exactly which one it is, but
It was a Nazi debate on the Crucible.
yes,
Oh, that
that
fucking
one.
guy. The most relatable thing I could have done with that guy was drag my knuckles along the ground and eat some dirt. Jesus fucking Christ, that guy was
Not
stupid.
wrong.
It was, yeah, it was a lot. So, I remember you saying, and I'm sorry to bring this up, but you said like stop acting like a woman because I think he was saying something and you were saying something. I forget the context, but I remembered listening to that and thinking, well, here's the thing, right? If the point is that he's being emotional and making solely emotional arguments, if we can at least see that that's the case, I feel like it is a step too far to say you're just acting like a woman because, I mean, hello, like I I don't think that's amazing to say. Um, and also, it brings up a pretty interesting, you know, aspect to debating culture in general, which is that women and also like minorities that would engage with femininity, like i.e. like gay people, are the butt of jokes for the sake of relatability or for the sake of debates. Or just to be heard. And like I wanted to hear what you had to say about that because I was wondering.
Yeah, it's genuinely complicated. The issue is, so the relatability is one thing, and the other one is like strength. So when you're arguing, it really depends on how far along they are politically. I guess I'll start with the strength thing. If you're arguing with people who are neo-Nazis, these people are, I think the term would be, they're like epistemically anti-empiricist, which means that reality doesn't matter to them. This is unfortunately quite common these days. Like on like a fundamental level, they are non-receptive to and uninterested in empirical reality. They have no curiosity for it, and if they encounter something that's inconvenient to them, they won't just like avoid it. They will deny it outright, knowing they have no reason to. Arguing with them on a factual basis is impossible because you might as well be talking to a wall. There's no point. Now, you can't convince the person you're debating to be brought over because, especially content creators, like, we make our money with our positions. We're not gonna be moved over like that. No Nazi is going to give up their, like, donation income stream. Like, oh, I'm converted. No, fuck that. They're never going to do that. Their audience, however, is potentially more capable of being moved over, but they're just as bad as he is, at least in terms of the anti-empiricism. My goal when I do stuff like that is to try to like jumpstart or shock some of the intuitive responses they have that condition how respectful they are towards the person they watch. In other words, I want to make him look weak and stupid so they feel weak and stupid for liking him. Unfortunately, nothing makes a far right person feel more weak and stupid than being compared to a woman. That's a fact. That's not it's not an indictment. That is something they feel. It's very clear in their politics. um and I've found in the past that, like, that's the kind of insult they can't really get over. If you're a Nazi, like, if you're called stupid or you call them stupid or anything like that, kind of brushes off them, because in their head it's just like, oh ha, he's calling me stupid. What is he, some kind of Jew? Like, that's what's running in their head. They even have a joke for this, like Jewish lab coats. The idea is like any info they don't like, it's Jewish, right? Like, that's where they're at. They don't like being called or being compared to women, though, because women are an unavoidable material fact of reality, and it's something they care about a lot. Basically, all Nazis care about women. It's a big part of their philosophy. It's not abstract. It's empirical. It's direct, and it's something they very much do not want to be. And frankly, it seems like half Nazis are repressive trans girls anyway. So there's something to be kicked in with that too, judging from the emails I've gotten from, oh yeah, I used to be an alt-writer and now I've transitioned. Thank you for that. Who knows why people are the way they are. Anyway, the point is, it kicks someone, and I've found that it can be really effective in moving people over. And I do know that it gets a bit of a bite and it's regressive, but I figure when we're talking about potentially like moving people over in that way, I don't think there are a lot of other options when it comes to people who are that far right. And the potential benefit of moving anyone over, that's like a life saved kind of, which I think is worth engaging in that kind of language. Um, I can be criticized on the grounds that there are other ways of doing this, but in this specific case, I don't actually think there are. I legitimately think that when you're that far gone, the only real way of sort of jarring people at that point is to use that kind of language, because it's It's the only thing that still resonates with an entirely intuition-based belief system. Um, and as for the relatability thing, that's a little bit less defensible, but I still think it's generally pretty useful. It's just about showing them that you're not some like triggered, stiff up their ass SJW who can make a couple jokes. Makes them take you a bit more seriously because they think that you're not totally, drowning in the Kool-Aid.
Um, the only thing that like I feel like is an issue with that is that I think that you kind of are making sort of like arbitrarily drawing a distinction between things that you can like use that tactic with, like for example using you're acting like a woman right now because like that is more allowable than if you were to necessarily say if you were to like for example say you're acting like an n-word right now, which I feel like would dig just as much, but I think you intuitively know that one is like more okay than the other, but isn't the fact that like you are putting down a particular group of people, and in this case it's women, to make this point. Do you think that that's that there is a like that is something that's worth it?
No, I do, yeah. If it saves a life in that respect. Oh, and as for the you're acting like an N-word thing, if it weren't for the woke cancel culture mob, then sure, I'd go that far too. 50 years ago, that probably would have been the equivalent. You imagine? That's some like what's the name of that guy? What's the name of that guy who the corrupt politician who Head really likes? Fuck.
Oh, it's Huey Long.
Huey Long, that's some Huey
Huey
Long
Long
shit right
dong.
there. You imagine like some like extremely edgy white guy in 62 arguing with a racist, and the racist is getting all loud and hollering. You're like, well, you're acting like an N-word, or something like that. I can imagine back then that being the kicker. I don't really think we're at a point right now where that's the more effective way of engaging in that particular strategy. But no, it's fully the same logic for sure. I try and compensate for this. Obviously, politically and socially, this is a very progressive community. I don't. I tend to like hit down really hard at anything that looks like actual sexism in my chat. Um, and that is a potential cost, but I have to wonder. And I gotta say, no way of me empirically determining this. Right? I could never actually do the math on it, but lots of people in my community who are converted ex-alt-righters. And if I had to put a number to how many of them were moved over, at least in part, because I made a content creator they used to like look like an idiot with that kind of behavior, I wonder if I could put that up against, well, how much like harm have I done in like a sexism kind of way, or like made women feel like trash or anything. I'm sure there have been some to that effect, but for now, I feel like that feels like a gamble that leans in more towards the good. Um, but that's just more a product of my observations. I don't think I can really math that out.
I think that there's a criticism specifically from a side of the left that's like the anti-debate left. That's like saying like, well, Vaush, you are moving people over to the left, but those people that you were moving over, you're using tactics which are still like bigoted, right? Essentially, you're like whatever, using a sexist way to move a person from being a leftist to being a sexist left winger. You know what I mean? And I think that like from a utilitarian perspective, it's like okay, well they're no longer a fascist, so isn't that better? However, isn't there a problem there that you might be reinforcing those kinds of hierarchies that will remain like even after somebody's like no longer been a fascist?
Sure, I would say that if I had sexist left wingers in my community, but I don't think it leads to that. I think it's a jolt right then that maybe sets somebody down the road of being more accepting of left-leaning politics, and in that process, they soften up on the gender politics as well. Um, so I don't think the trade-off stays. I think when you're in the community, you're necessarily a pro-feminist. At the very least, I don't see any pushback from my community on the feminist issues. There are always the main pushback I see is from like young people. I have 14-year-old boys in the community don't get this or that about women's experiences, and that's just a part of life. It takes time for everyone to learn. I don't know if there's like a kind of principal trade-off that's happening though. It's just more of a like shock. But keep in mind the shock of like, oh, well, he just made a sexist joke, you know, or whatever imagined consequences there would be of that. That's the point of it, right? I mean, the shock of implementing that language from a left-leaning person is part of the thing that makes them look more humiliating in comparison. Imagine being a neo-Nazi and having a socialist turn up to make fun of you by comparing you to a woman. It emasculates them. And that's, honest to God, I think emasculation is the only politics these dipshits recognize once they're that far over. It's a way of destabilizing them and maybe getting them to, at least the followers, the viewers on their side, to reconsider, you know, well, why do I actually give a shit what this guy has to say about the Jews or the banking system or whatever? You know, why do I think this guy is advocating for the apex of masculine behavior when he just got called a soy boy by a lefty? Um, Anyway, yeah, it's difficult for me to defend, not because I don't believe in it, but because we're basically just arguing vibes, right?
Yeah, for sure. And I think that like you saying that like, oh, calling him a soy boy, that would also sort of like fall under a spectrum of like what is allowable, right? Which is like it, I would say that like the thing that we're arguing about is like, you know, maybe calling somebody a woman as the point as like a tactic might not be the most useful thing. Um, or might have problems with it, but like neither of us would disagree with that. Like calling a right winger a soy boy, you know what I mean? Which is essentially calling them like weak and and I guess in a way feminine.
Right. No,
Is like
it
yeah,
always hits back to that, doesn't it? It's pretty unavoidable, unfortunately. If you want to get a right winger's goat, you got to hit him like that. Unfortunately, it's not like you're gonna arrive at any other, you know, argumentative tactic that'll upset them because they're they're pretty disconnected from reality. It's unfortunate. It wasn't always like that, by the way. I swear to God. Maybe this isn't the world that the two of you are going to grow up into, but even at the beginning of my channel, back in mid-Trump presidency, conservatives were still interested in discussing the empirics on at least some social issues. I remember having those discussions, but now I don't see them anywhere. It's all just dogmatism. So the world you two are going to grow up into is just going to be ever so slightly worse than the one that I graduated into. Sorry
Thank you
about
for
that.
that. um, I was gonna say, for the thing that we were talking about before, I I also would ask, do you think that like at least engaging with this misogyny in this way, because I mean I don't know how else to put it. I'm trying to put it in better terms, but at least like using it in this way for debates to pull people over. Do you think that that's like worth like kind of separating yourself from other people on the left, even if like they, uh, even if you know you agree on typically every single topic, it's just a matter of like the usage of this.
I do, and it really sucks that I have to make that trade-off because I feel like it's pretty obvious in other places where that trade-off is being made and respected. Like a good example would be ContraPoints. Or a lot, let's be real, a lot of trans women content creators who will make a lot of self-deprecating, transphobic, and sexist jokes. I mean, especially since self-directed sexism from a trans woman is a kind of gender affirmation. Like if a trans woman says like, "Oh, well, I've been more lightheaded lately, bimbo," you know, like which they do constantly, of course, because it's an affirmation of a kind. But that's often seen as they're right because they're trans and a woman, and therefore they have the ability to make those kinds of jokes. I don't know how well that works when you're ContraPoints and have an audience of millions of non-trans people, though. And also, a lot of these jokes have a broader scattershot, right? But they're accepted because it's understood that there's a kind of value in engaging with, I guess, the problematic discourse, the behaviors. It makes you look less uptight. A lot of Contra's videos, her video on cringe or on men, those both dally in humor that would get me in trouble, not just because I'm a cis guy and you know she's not, but like the logic of the humor. You know, I feel like often a lot less charitability is given to me because of how people on the left perceive me. Like maybe if I was sort of unambiguously viewed as progressive, um, they wouldn't see stuff that from other people they would be like, oh, okay, well, obviously that's just them being edgy. That's fine. They're still progressive. Their community's progressive. But with me, they kind of like clutch their pearls a bit, you know, like, oh, maybe this is reactionary, or you know, their community is more vulnerable to that kind of rhetoric. I see that one a lot, for example, like, you have to be more responsible because of your community. Well, I've seen my community, and they're ridiculously progressive and frankly sensitive in a lot of ways that I'm not. Um, so maybe it's just like a fear people have. It's like they perceive a greater like threat or ambiguity from me, which means that it comes across as worse when I do that sort of stuff. I don't know. You know, it is a trade-off, though. I do wish that people would be a bit more sympathetic, at least to the intentions. Um, though I'm afraid that with time, uh, this is all going to be like less relevant, I think, because we're kind of leaving the debate era, at least as I understood it when I started doing YouTube stuff. Like, stuff is getting, it's advancing, you know what I mean? In terms of like how these views are being presented and what the best ways are to counter them. Um, so yeah, I mean, I guess we'll see how it all plays out. There might be less and less room for like tactical edginess as well because we're entering a sort of a less charitable world. Um, I guess I'll have to see how I play that.
It's kind of unfortunate. We like debates.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
like debates too. I'll always do debates. Don't get me wrong. It's just like it's that anti-empiricist thing, right? You know, what do you do if you're debating someone like James Wood? What do you do if you're debating somebody like Michael Tracy or anybody like that? People who are so far over that they can't even be talked to. They live in a different world. Debates aren't really the best way of getting through to that because there's this dream a lot of people have of Rick Sanchezing their way through every debate. Like, if you're logical enough, you know, you can find these incisive hits that'll reveal how dumb they are. But it doesn't really matter to their audience because the audience is dumb in the same ways. And a lot of people can just filibuster or bide for time until your 2 hours up and you've actually not really discussed anything. Um, yeah, I don't know. At this point, you two are being my therapists. You know, this is an environment I have to deal with. I totally get where you two are coming from. I don't fault you in any way for feeling that way. I'm always looking for or thinking of ways to do the same basic things, but in a less controversial way. Um, because I swear to God, for all the stuff I get in trouble for saying, I'm thinking stuff 10 times worse. You know, it's not always easy to sort of on the spot roll through and find the least clippable way of getting an idea across, especially when you're sort of edgy by tendency. But you know, there's always room for improvement.
Absolutely. Lisa, do you want to?
Yeah, I don't know if I agree with it. Just because I have seen people in, you know, these communities kind of hop onto misogyny as like, you know, a funny haha, and I don't know if that's to your fault. I wouldn't really like blame you. I just I think that in part it is the responsibility of people to try to understand and to kind of dissect the usages of these things and like the context, of course, always. Um, it's it's just kind of it is also really sad because like I've seen you, you know, go like I've seen you go through these controversies, and it does make me sad because I've seen your stuff. I'm like, I know the context. Like, Vaush is cool. He's all right. Um, it's just it's frustrating because it's hard to explain this to other people too. Like, you know, um, especially because it kind of does like break people away. But that's also like a general problem on the left, is just like very niche topics getting in the, you know, way of things.
No, well, it's true, of course. We have very little room to argue with each other these days as well. Um, like I firmly believe that like jolts to intuitive disgust and fear are the best way of moving over people on the far right. You got to jostle them. You got to give them a tummy ache. You know. In terms of the best way to do that, I mean, you're right in that there's kind of like a spectrum of acceptability. The soy boy stuff is probably not cancelable because I've seen even H bomber guy will make jokes like that at the expense of like Paul Joseph Watson. Um,
Didn't he start those, especially because that was? Didn't he start those because a lot of his like early stuff was just picking on a specific Nazi guy who looks weird and just making fun of him for looking weird.
which is itself problematic. But this is, we live in the world we live in. Obviously, how nice it would be if we could solve all political disputes without ever dirtying our hands. Um, I personally take great delight in calling far right people ugly. I think it's a joy. I think it's politically necessary. I'll defend that. It fully is, especially since their politics are literally based on like a eugenicist perspective, where there's a natural genetic beauty to being politically correct. Like you can throw wrenches in that shit all the time, just by being mean. And being mean online is very important. It's critical. But no, I agree. It's important to find a way to balance those concerns appropriately. If you could, soy boy, you can go for, probably the woman stuff is tetchy. You're right, dropping the hard R, a little more tetchy. I think there'd be some people who would be mad at me for that one. There's probably like an ideal on that spectrum, but somebody's going to be unhappy with me, like no matter where I am on that spectrum. So there's no appeasing everyone.
I was gonna say, I'm not saying anything contradictory to you saying, oh, right-leaning people are ugly. I couldn't react in any better way. I just thought it was really funny the way you said it.
Oh, I mean, being evil makes your face look all weird anyway. So that's
British.
Yeah, there's like a ghoulish thing going on, but it's like kicking people down a bit too. Like, for instance, I don't really make fun of people for being fat that much, I've been fat myself. Not that I really care. People call me fat anyway. It just seems kind of juvenile. But I think you can make fun of someone for being fat if they're doing that kind of like white superiority bullshit. Like those white guys who are like, we're the master race, and they look like a thumb on top of a like sort of a greasy potato. In that case, all of a sudden, your real criticism isn't just being fat. It's like, well, what the fuck are you talking about? You specifically. I think that's a bit more acceptable. It's still problematic, but
Yeah, and it's like I think the main thing is just like the concept of making fun of people at all is like creating a hierarchy between you and them. And so like for us who are anarchists, it's like we want to abolish all hierarchies. And you've talked to Zoe Baker before, and one of the things that she like talks about a lot is like that we can't recreate the same hierarchies that we fight against, but within our own movement. It's kind of like trying to create a democracy by electing a king. You know what I mean? It's just like you're going to end up with something else. And so like it's kind of our job to try the hardest that we can to not like reinforce those hierarchies. And I think it is tough because we're in a political situation where you just kind of have to get your hands dirty. You know what I mean? It's like we like one of a hierarchy is that of violence. You know what I mean? A person being violent on another person, but in order to fight back, to defend yourself, you need to like create that hierarchy again. You need to fight back. And so it's like, how do you abolish hierarchy without actually participating in it? And
Well, I'll say this much. You can't let perfect be the enemy of good. Considering the fact that the former president and 2024 presidential candidate Donald Trump met with neo-Nazis for dinner at Mar-a-Lago just the other day, I'd say we're so far away from an abolition of hierarchy. If we could move where we are right now from neo-Nazis in charge and also people are sexist to neo-Nazis aren't in charge and also people make sexist jokes, I'd say that'd be such a significant positive change that you could justify getting your hands a bit dirty to achieve it. Or to put it another way, trying to abolish sort of these interpersonal hierarchies that you engage in when you're mean online right now, is like trying to use like a horsehair brush to dust the rubble off of a building that is currently collapsing because it's being bombed by the Luftwaffe. We are in a difficult position right now.
For sure, I do think that like in the broad strokes, we should probably like the thing is that like let's say we wanted to do the whole socialist thing, like actually just do revolutionary action. And we were thinking like, okay, well, how are we going to do this? And if we were to copy like the Leninists and like do it in an authoritarian kind of top-down way, we would end up with a Soviet-style top-down autocracy. You know what I mean? And so it's just like we have to. I do think that like when as we're engaging in politics, we do need to keep in mind that we have to balance playing dirty and like stooping down to their level, but also not doing that. And I think that that's tough because it's kind of like, it's tough because we're progressives and we're anti-oppression, but the concept of like majority, voting the minority, like, even if the left is a majority, we're still voting and like oppressing, I guess, the people below us and stuff. So it's just like, obviously we're in agreement that it's like that doesn't matter. We need to do it anyway, So
Of course. But we're in a position right now where I will just say there are limits to reasonable consideration, especially given the times. Um, I think we're right now, essentially any, rhetorical tactics that can pull people over from the Nazi side of things, I think are justifiable. It's just a matter of the best way of doing it, right? Maybe you can do it by being errantly sexist, or maybe you can drop that down a couple points by being just errantly toxically masculine, which I guess is an improvement depending on how it's done with the soy boy thing. At any rate, it's an ongoing process. Um, when the two of you graduate, I'm sure the country is going to be a considerably worse place than it is right now, even. So we'll have to continue updating our tactics to respect the material circumstances. Hopefully, it doesn't get too much worse.
no, yeah, that's absolutely something that I'm super excited for.
Hopefully.
Hopefully.
Um,
I actually ran over on time here. I enjoyed the conversation very much, and I appreciate the both of you taking the time to come on. I am only now realizing an hour 20 minutes in that I could have hit the button that turns my camera on, and I just never did that. I just usually don't do that because I'm the only person recording.
that's right.
Yeah. So, hi.
I was gonna say Lisa, do you want to talk about the chat thing, like just as the last thing,
I have but a moment, but if you have another thing, then hit me with it.
like just the final minute or whatever.
I'm okay. It's fine.
Are you sure? Okay.
Now I'm curious.
I was gonna say, so the last time I talked, I remember,
Oh, right.
yeah.
Yeah.
I'm scared by that reaction, by the way. But I think that I think that we understand at least what I'm talking about. Like, the last time I talked, I just talked I think twice, and my friends were telling me something about the stream that like kind of made me a little I'm words leave me. I don't know how to describe it, but I um I heard that like people were being weird in chat, and it's because I was a woman, and I remember specifically like not one but like a couple of my friends were like, you turned off chat when I came on, and I don't blame you. I'm sure that it was off of like the best of your like intentions. I really don't. Um but I think that that's what I was going to mention when it came to like misogyny on the left, because like maybe even in implicit ways, like people kind of welcome this misogyny, and
Well,
I
I
don't
want to
want to
be
like
I want to be
yeah.
clear, real quick. I want to be clear. The problem with chat wasn't them being misogynistic. The problem with chat was them being thirsty, with respect. Now, you got a 50-50 split of people being ooh woo girl, and the other people being like shut up about ooh woo girl, which made the chat intolerable. Of course, this is still informed by misogyny. I just want to make it clear, specify the exact behavior we're talking about. There's a lot of dumbasses in chat, and I hear there's a pretty strong overlap between watching live streamers on their off-site dedicated community chat and being virgins. So, bit of a community disposition there. But I gave them shit for that after too.
You gotta say, YouTube chat was way worse though.
Okay, well, YouTube chat's pretty bad too.
I don't think you can control that, so like again
I need a wallpaper of like hot bikini models behind me at all times, like cycling through, so that they're sort of like inundated, and they become vaccinated against like chicks, and you know, they stop freaking out when they see one. That's the goal.
That was a lot to process. I don't know how to respond to that.
Yeah, it's a strategy. It's actually anti-sexist to have like the bikini swimsuit model collage behind you at all times with the green screen on the cam.
You just need to add the bot that, like, when you know those bots on Discord where you can just like type in cat or anime girl and it pops in. That you should add that to VGG.
Yeah, or I could just be a VTuber cat girl myself. Anyway, yeah, no, it's pretty embarrassing of chat. I think I don't think it comes from the same kind of place that you would get like the haha women are dumb kind of behavior from. I think if anything, it's just more like embarrassing, like adolescent simping. But yeah, no, it's still an issue. Yeah, got to bring the hammer
I feel
down.
bad
These
for you
fucks.
because, again, this is something that you have to deal with, and like I do want like better, you know, community like stuff for you, something at least a little bit more manageable. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Also, about what the both of you were, you know, proposing, modern problems. Sure, fucking, I guess.
Yeah, modern solutions. You know, the majesty of technology. Yeah, no, it's cool. I feel that they're kind of acting like, I don't know. It's like the cartoon trope where somebody where like a chick shows up and all the guys do the eyeballs awooga thing. It's you know, very very cartoony behavior, very very silly stuff. But I can hit them with the hammer harder next time and see if they don't shut the fuck up. I think they were fine this time. That's a step forward.
I would say so. The second half was only the first half was weird. The second half, there was nothing bad.
Oh, I hope they all feel very bad for getting me in trouble here.
You're not in trouble. I'm so sorry.
Why would you be
I was also gonna say
chat's always in the wrong.
Yeah, the last time, I think I heard like a little bit after because I stuck around and you were like, oh, also like don't be weird is also being weird, and I just want to say completely agree. Just like straight up, like, hey guys, don't be weird. Like 1,000 times older or 1,000 times over is just being weird because you see the problem. It's, I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't know.
it's like if you have 100 people in chat, or I never have that few, I guess. But if you have people in chat, and then one person is like, "Oh, wooga," and then 88 people respond with, "Dude, what the fuck?" Like that is infinitely worse than the initial awooga on its own. It's total lack of social decorum in this live streamer off-site dedicated community chat. Who could have thought? I'm sorry.
Yeah. Yeah.
Apart from my idiot chatters, who all apologize profusely to you. Still, I had a wonderful time talking to you both, and I appreciate you bringing it up.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah.
Of course. And I imagine I will in the future too.
Yeah. Well,
right.
If we have other issues, we'll bring them to you, and we'll critique you in the same way. So
you're free to email me whenever you like. Y'all take care. Okay?
I'm gonna yell next time. I'm just gonna be vicious.
Do it. Yeah. Just scream. Just say slurs. I'll get in trouble for it. You don't have a YouTube channel. Well, you might. I don't know.
I do not.
Okay,
I'm not gonna do that.
You're safe.
All right, take care of yourself.
They're thinking about it. They're thinking, should I? It's tempting, I know. Have a wonderful day, both of you. Or night.
Take it easy.
Bye.